The legal director for the Oklahoma chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union says the ACLU is launching an investigation into actions by the Muskogee County District Attorney and Sheriff. This week, charges were abruptly dropped against a man charged with transporting alleged drug money after traveling through Muskogee to reach his home in Dallas. That came after a Washington Post story about the criminal filing and the confiscation of more than $53,000.
What happened to Ewa of Dallas while driving through Muskogee has drawn national outrage. He was pulled over by a Muskogee County Sheriff's deputy on February 27th.
As soon as I saw the lights, I was like, what did I do? I didn't speed because I'm always very careful about my speed.
Ewa was told he had a broken tail light. He was not cited, but instead given a warning. But he says his relief turned to growing apprehension and then fear as deputies detained him at the scene for an hour. Dan Albin is Ewa's attorney.
And because the officer was asking him about a list of things that it was very obvious he would be in trouble if he had drugs, guns, or cash. And Mr. Waugh said no to that, hoping it would keep him out of trouble because he wanted no trouble with the Muskogee County Sheriff's Department.
Albin explains that because of the line of questioning, Ewa was not truthful when he stated he had no money in his car. Orville Loge is the district attorney for Muskogee County.
He was read his Miranda warning. He understood and agreed to talk. At that time, his story changed, and he stated that the money was for a orphanage, I think in Burma, that he managed to abandon.
Loge says deputies didn't believe Ewa.
And we believed that Mr. Waugh was conducting criminal activity.
Why?
Why was he conducting criminal activity?
Why did you believe he was?
Because he lied to the police, and it's not normal to drive around with $53,000 and as a band manager.
Questioning at the Muskogee County Sheriff's Office went on for another 5 hours, even though Ewa strongly denied any wrongdoing.
And it's clear that there was a legitimate source of the funds. Ewa had all kinds of documentation with him about the tour, not only the pictures on his phone. The officers visited the website for the band. Ewa had the entire visa application for the tour for the band.
Albin says at his client's insistence, an investigator called the leader of the band, who confirmed Ewa's story, that the money came from 19 church concerts, which raised money for a Christian school and orphanage in Burma.
And it's my understanding there was a language barrier to a lot of the conversations. So as to that, I think the officers will answer those questions about what language barriers prevented them from verifying certain things.
The fact that he was unable to confirm the story due to a communication barrier is not the burden of proof that the police and the prosecutors have to meet. There is a presumption of innocence in this country, and you don't charge people with felonies because you can't confirm their story, because the person that would confirm their story speaks primarily another language, and you can't be bothered to get an interpreter.
They finally let Ewa go, but deputies kept the money.
The Muskogee police took more than $53,000 away from me, even though I didn't do anything wrong.
And more than 5 weeks later, an arrest warrant was issued for Ewa on a charge of acquiring proceeds from drug activity.
When I learned about the warrant, I was very scared. I never drink, I never smoke. I never touched any kind of those.
I think it's incredibly important to understand that it is not illegal to travel with cash. It is perfectly legal to travel with cash, any amount of cash. There is no legal or illegal amount of cash. There is no amount of cash that is suspicious or that triggers probable cause.
Loge says Ewa is to blame because he didn't have proper documentation for the money.
And so if they're doing some sort of religious function, they had not filed the proper documentation with the IRS. And so his story wasn't adding up, and so they could not verify his story.
That is among the silliest excuses for seizing money that I've ever heard. No one carries around proper IRS documentation for cash, and I don't even know what proper IRS documentation for cash would be. I travel with money in my wallet. I don't have proper IRS documentation for that cash. The idea that you need some sort of document from the IRS in order to safely carry cash in the United States is just outrageous.
His only sin and his only crime was having cash, and that's just un-American.
Oklahoma State Senator Kyle Loveless says the Ewa case illustrates what's wrong with Oklahoma's civil asset forfeiture law.
One of the biggest problems with civil forfeiture is that it is agencies that are propping up their budget by innocent people's stuff. And so you want to make sure that, in my mind, any agency shouldn't be able to do that. If they want to go after people's stuff, then they shouldn't be doing it to prop up their budget.
It's a smoking gun case.
Legal director for the American Civil Liberties Union in Oklahoma, Brady Henderson, says money is seized from innocent people regularly in this state.
What's different about this case is not that it's unique in its facts, it's that really it's so easy to prove how much misconduct there was by the DA's office, by the sheriffs. That's unusual. I mean, when you look at the officials who were involved in this case, this was wrongdoing. This was either really an incredible degree of incompetence or it was some serious corruption. And I think that only further investigation is going to tell. That's an investigation that we're going to be undertaking. We're about to launch, I think, a very significant investigation of Muskogee.
The morning a Washington Post report was published detailing Ewa's case, the district attorney's office was still pursuing the criminal case against Wa. The news spread across the country throughout the day. By late afternoon, the district attorney dismissed all charges in the case and wrote a check returning the money to Ewa, the band, and the charities.
I think if they hadn't had the media process and the media attention on it, then the Wa's, they would have probably had to fight for their money. They would have had to get the attorneys and fight it every step of the way, and they probably, at the end of the day, probably wouldn't have been successful.
For 2 years, proposed legislation by Loveless to tighten the law regarding civil asset forfeiture in criminal cases has been shot down by other lawmakers. Loveless hopes the case of Ewa gets the attention of his colleagues.